But joining the chamber was probably one of the best decisions I had made as a business owner, because the chamber, not only do they network you, but they introduce you to people outside of the community. In this case, I met Susan Davis, one of the first people, I guess you can imagine, I met. And what happens is that organizations will come to the chamber and say, hey, do you have any members that might have, some expertise or interest in X, Y, or Z? And Susan was working with Joshua Welter from the Main Street Alliance. And at the time, there was a lot of talk around American cities about the fact that that the government had bailed out Wall Street. And if you remember, any of them that are in banking business, that Wall Street was bailed out, but they were hanging on to their money. They had all this cash, and they were heavy on cash, but they weren't lending money to particularly to small businesses. And if you happen to be a small business in a high-risk category like construction or restaurants, they were categorically denying loans. So everyone's sitting here thinking, okay, so we voted for bailout at the national level and the big banks and Wall Street. What about Main Street? So there was a group of progressive business owners in Seattle that decided to create, and we'll say Washington, the Main Street Alliance. And so the Main Street Alliance came to Susan and said, do you have any members who might be interested? Susan introduced me to Joshua. We met right down here in the first floor. And Joshua and I we just connected. I felt like he was a political activist who didn't understand all of the intricacies of running a business. I actually brought one of my P&Ls and I showed him the months that Tutta Bella actually loses money and the months that we make money, and said, hey, it's tough. There are actually months where we have negative cash flow. And I think that kind of surprised him, because he's thinking, wow, you guys are such a popular business, but I just thought you could just pay dues and everything would be great. So he became an advocate, and before long we started to get notice. Patty Murray started visiting with us, because we became the voice of small business in America now. Our U.S. Senator Patty Murray came to Tutta Bella. We set up a round table of all the businesses back in 2008, 2009 that had suffered. Many of them, in one case, we had a bookstore in the University District who was using her credit cards to meet payroll because her line of credit had been frozen by the big banks, et cetera, et cetera. So Patty Murray's thinking about this. She takes the stories back to Washington, D.C. She speaks on the Senate floor and says, I've got businesses, small businesses, that are still really suffering. And they are the lifeblood of the economy. So at the time, the Senate was considering the Small Business Lending Act. They wanted to bail out small businesses the way large businesses had been bailed out. And the idea behind it was that they would find community banks throughout the United States. The idea was to provide $40 billion to community banks, because the big banks weren't lending. So they found little banks around the country that would lend money. They were going to provide $40 billion to them. The government was going to reduce the risk by guaranteeing more of the loan and then eliminating the fee. Those of you that have borrowed money, I borrow $1 million when I open a restaurant. There's about a $25,000 to $30,000 fee on it. So this program was going to eliminate the fee. So it's good for the lender, good for the borrower, good for the government, good for small business. And yet it was being blocked in Congress because it was Republican-led. So Patty Murray tells the story on the Senate floor. She got the notice of the White House. A few days later, I got a call on my cell phone that was like 202-000-0000. And I'm thinking, this is a prank call. I'm sure it's a prank call. And I answer it. Hello, Joe, this is the White House calling. And I'm like, oh yeah, right, sure. And we were wondering if you have time to meet with the president. He's coming to town next week, or in a couple weeks. And after I realized that it wasn't a prank call, I said, of course. Well, let me check my schedule first. So we met down in Pioneer Square, and I have some pictures of it here, but the president and I and two other small business owners sat down at a table for an hour. we each had about 20 minutes to tell him our story. And he looked over at me after talking to everybody, and I loved the president, by the way, because he was very professorial. He didn't just ask the typical questions, oh, how's your business? He asked the deep, like professors do, the second question that goes a little deeper. Tell me what keeps you up at night, Joe. I want to know what it's like to be a small business owner. But at the end of the meeting, he said, we're introducing this bill, Congress, the Small Business Lending Act, and I really love your story. Would you be willing to come back to the White House and be with me when I sign this into law? And I thought, well, of course, I would be honored. I'd be honored to do that. And I thought, oh, he's going to forget about it. But about a month later, it passed the House and the Senate on this Friday. I got a call that Friday afternoon, again from the White House, and his assistant said the president has requested that you be there when he signs this into law. So the government flew me coach back to DC, and I stayed right across the street from the White House. Got a great tour that evening of the Oval Office, and then I showed up the next day. And I was telling Sally earlier that I went to check in the East Room, and my name was on the list, like on the clipboard there, and they saw my name, and they immediately walked me up to the front of the room and took the red cord off and sat me right in front of the president's podium. And I thought, well, why, with all these governors and everybody else in the room and these bankers, why me? They said, well, we didn't want to tell you, but since you've asked, you're going to be in the president's speech. He's going to mention you, and so he wants to be able to point to you. The end of this story is that when the president did mention me in the speech, he mentioned Seattle, he mentioned Tutta Bella. He pointed to me off the script and said, I still haven't tried his pizza, but he promises me I'm going to get it someday. So I don't know about what you would do, but the next day I called my little connection at the White House, and I said, I think that there was an executive order yesterday that the president really wanted pizza delivered, so we have to fulfill that request. And I was a little bit tenacious in that every time I heard that the president was coming to Seattle, I called and asked if we could get him into Tutta Bella. My goal was to get him to this Tutta Bella because I don't think a sitting president, or any president for that matter, has ever been to the Rainier Valley. And his plane's down at Boeing Field, so it's right on the way. So the Secret Service came, they did their advance. We thought it was all going to happen. I couldn't tell anybody. I was dying to tell people. I couldn't tell anybody. I think I called my mother and told her. And then last minute, they canceled. And I got this call on a Wednesday, it was supposed to be here Friday, and they said, we have some bad news. The president will not be coming to your restaurant because he's not flying into Boeing Field, he's flying to Payne Field because there's a big thing with Boeing they want to announce. He wants to tour the 787. So I guess Boeing and the 787 trumped Rainier Valley and pizza. But he said, but the president, you got to level Obama, because the president said, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to go to a pizzeria that was on the schedule. And they said, no, Mr. President, sorry. He said, well, it's a pizzeria, they deliver, why don't you just have them deliver to Air Force One? And so they called me out and thinking, well, that's Everett? The pizza's going to be really bad by the time. I wanted to say no at first because I didn't want him to have crappy pizza, but I thought about it, and we arranged to have a 4,000-pound oven delivered to the tarmac at Payne Field. And we prepared pizza for 60 people, the press corps and the president. We actually did some research on his favorite toppings, and we created the El Presidente, which we still feature on President's Weekend every month. And there's a picture here of us delivering.
Hard evidence.
So this is us delivering pizza to Air Force One. And one thing I have to say about the president and his staff is that the pilots of Air Force One came out of the cockpit and walked down the stairs. I think we have some pictures of this, and actually helped carry the pizzas back into the plane. And they just have this attitude of service. And there's a picture of us standing, I don't have it here, but standing on the steps. So that's a long story. Thank you for indulging me because I don't get to tell it very often. I did a lot years ago when we did it. That was 2010, I think.
So how many times have you been to the White House since then?
So a total of 3 times. And I've sat on the governor's transition committee. the Mayor's Committee for the Minimum Wage. Joe Biden was in town 6 months ago and actually visited Tutta Bella in Westlake. And I guess the point of bragging a little bit is that I'm an introvert, first of all. People don't realize that, so it's not like me to get out and get out of my comfort zone. I had absolutely no interest in government when I opened my business. I just wanted to open a pizzeria and pay the bills. I had a daughter in college. I just wanted to make sure that her tuition was paid, and then I paid rent here and paid my mortgage at home. And yet when I joined the chamber, the opportunities start coming to you to interact with people outside the community as well. And it just blossoms and it snowballed into something I never ever imagined. And I sit on the governor's small business advisory committee. I mean, whoever would have thought that? Last thing I wanted to do was get involved in anything government. I didn't even trust government when I opened the restaurant. So that's my case for being a member, joining committees, getting outside your comfort zone, not just attending meetings, but getting involved, because you never know who you're going to meet that's going to introduce you to someone else. Sally, you and I were talking about how to this day, you're still getting contacts and making deals that you can trace back to the chamber.
Many degrees of separation.
Yeah, yes, all these degrees of separation, but it starts here. And I just want to thank you for indulging me, for being here, and for being a co-business owner. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to open a business, and you need a network of friends and support to make it work. So thank you.